Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for January 17th, 2025. I'm Benji Fisher, sharing my screen and moderating. Also present are some of our regulars, Aaron McHale, Ralph Kohler, and Simo Helston. Thanks all for joining. And we're planning to resume the discussion we were working on last week. The issue number is 3370326 to refine the field descriptions. For the sake of the recording and for Aaron, who was not here last week, if you go to admin structure, content types, and choose a content type such as basic page, manage the fields, and create a new field. There are, 11 fields or field groups listed on this. If you open up a field group such as number, and click continue, it is this help text describing and differentiating the different options at this stage of the field creation process. That's the text we're discussing. Aaron, are you up to speed?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
And we've been working from a Google Doc. Ralph pasted a link into the Zoom chat. And Ralph, did you want to say something about the comments at the top of this? Summarize these for us.
Yeah, just quickly, if you go to step 1 on the sheet on step 1.
Oh, the other tab.
Yep, the other tab. That is shorter. Those were mostly covered. There's only one detail we have not wordsmithed yet, which is basically the label choose a type of field. If you take a look at the front at the admin UI, then you'll see which is on top of those chip cards. You have to go back.
Back one step.
And there you see choose a type of field. And the other thing is basically on the next step. If you go, for example, to the number again with continue, there you have basically choose an option below, which is using directional microcopy, which is also not necessarily recommendable. And the other points on that for that second step, basically, in part we've already covered it, and there are only two details. If you can go back again. If you choose, for example, media, yeah, that there's on one hand, there's the problem that the description is basically that is providing the difference between media and file and image is provided on the second step, which should basically available on the first step. And then if you go please back again, is the entire problem, but to that we'll get probably when we get to those microcopies of those field types. For one is the problem that with reference, you're able also to create a media reference. So you have two ways to create media, which is not directly apparent. But it's not directly labeled. If you go there, you see only content, taxonomy term, and user. But if you go to other, or it doesn't matter to which you go, because it's basically just setting the preset for type of item there. And if you scroll down, then you have media. Yeah, exactly, media. And that way, you're able to create it that as well there. And if you go back, but I guess the back button is not properly working in a current state that way if you're on the field settings page.
Yeah, my browser back button is working.
Yeah, but then you run in that kind of errors because it is not really intended to go back.
Oh, I think that error message was there the first time I visited the
Oh,
page
it's still
because
okay.
it's just
Okay, good.
telling me that the label field is required.
Okay, good. And if you go back another step, please, and then there, and again another one, please. Yeah, no. And yeah, then the point about is the refer are those options really necessary for reference? Because there is no real, there are no real descriptions, as you can see in the Google Sheet, and it's just basically about setting a different reference. And I'm not sure if it justifies having three different options. Not sure. And also the other point is media really, shouldn't it combined with field upload, which is currently called field upload and which contains files and images? And because technically, semantically, from my perspective, those three fit together. And yeah, we will see in the discussion when we get to that. But those are the main points that are slightly different to simple wordsmithing. It's more about how things are structured in that case, and therefore I wanted to raise it up front.
Right. I would say that since those are not wordsmithing, they should be a separate issue in order to control scope. Um, the first point you made about media is that there's just one option here. It's not a group. And there's all this text that's been here for a while differentiating media reference fields from file and image fields. And then very similar text is here.
Identical.
And I think a much better strategy would be, I think you suggested this at the end, would be to combine media into the same group as file and image uploads. And then we'd have a very natural place to distinguish file and image fields from media.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea, but I think it's out of scope for the current issue.
Yeah. But the point is, I think Laurie, I'm not sure if it was on this issue or another, pointed out that they considered moving media and images and files into one group, but due to the fact that media is also a reference, and therefore they thought it would be better to keep it apart from either reference and file upload. That was their reasoning behind. But when I
And
first tried it, I had trouble to find certain things that way because file upload is also sort of misleading. That goes back into microcopy and wordsmithing. Therefore, it's overlapping.
but it also gets back to that being out of scope for the
Yeah,
current issue.
Uh, I'd like to raise here that media is not always files. It can be also embedded media from another service. So it's not always files or uploads. So it can be also some YouTube embed.
yep.
Right. And as part of that separate issue, if we do combine these, then file upload would no longer be appropriate. We'd probably want to rename that group.
Yep.
Um, so while we've been talking, Thomas Howell has joined us. Hi, Thomas. Uh, do you need some context for what we're talking about, or is it clear enough from watching my screen?
Very clear from watching the screen. Thank you.
Okay. So getting back to questions of words, we should definitely create an issue to discuss combining media with file upload. And that issue might also be the right place to point out that we can get to media references either from the reference or currently here in the proposal, get it from here. Do we want to have two different ways to get to media reference? But anyway, that's a separate issue. Getting back to the issue at hand, if I go back to the start, create a new field, Ralph pointed out that this text could be shortened instead of choose a type of field. You wanted to make it just choose field type?
That's my suggestion at the moment. I've posted the sheet. It's reading more straightforward from my non-native speaker perspective.
So choose a field type. And any other opinions on that? Go ahead, Thomas.
Thank you. To me, as a native English speaker, and there are going to be other opinions, I believe, field type sounds like a technical description. Type of field is something non-technical. So I would think potentially for very new people or someone who's like a marketer, if they were building a site, field type may be more confusing, though you can indeed infer what the meaning of it is, than type of field, which reads like an English sentence.
Is that the same for British English and American English? Because I know, like, for instance, with talking about people with disability, disabled people. So is that something that differs?
Your audio was kind of choppy there, but I did catch that you were asking about differences between American and British English, and maybe Aaron is the best person to address that.
I have no idea.
Simo, do you want to try again to ask your question?
Yeah, it's just if it's different in British English to ask if type of field or field type, but if it might be not obvious.
Yeah, I don't think there's any significant difference between American and British English for this question. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I was gonna add actually, I think it's such a niche thing. I've never had somebody come up to me in the street and be like, so what type of field should I use here? It's like that, I think we can just make a decision and go with it,
Ralph did give a thumbs up while Thomas was speaking. Personally, I don't think it makes a big difference, and I'm inclined to leave it alone and move on to other questions. Ralph, do you want to leave it as it is, or do you still want to make it a little bit shorter?
Not necessary. Thomas made a good point, and I've already updated. I set a current draft to the choose a type of field and the UX meeting and also to choose a type of field, and just leave the choose field type in my column. But I agree there to the Thomas's point, so all good.
Okay,
I
great.
wanted to document it in the sheet that label is also covered. No.
Okay, and then to the heading here, choose an option below. Yeah, Ralph points out that below is directional. We generally avoid that. It's also unnecessary. And my only question is whether we should use a period because choose an option is a full sentence, or whether we should use a colon. And again, I don't care much. Or leave it without punctuation. Should we just strike the word below, or should we put in some punctuation? I guess if no one cares, we'll just strike the word and leave it at that. Okay, so let's just make it choose an option. And shall we go back to the spreadsheet at this point?
Yep.
So,
We were at integer numbers at the last time.
right, I'm also thinking about which column I should be looking at.
You are in sheet number 1. You should go to step 2 first.
Okay,
Scroll
thank you.
down, and then column number C is where we currently are, and what the current state is column number B.
Right, so just make sure everyone is oriented here. Column B shows whole numbers, values are positive, negative, or 0, and that is what we see. That is not what we see here. The first column, column A, is the current state. Number without decimals. For example, 1, 2, 3.
Ah, yeah, right. Sorry. Column A is the current state. Column B is the current suggestion, which is basically mirroring the work I've done, and then column C is the meeting.
Right. So I think last week we agreed to these suggestions to use the phrase whole numbers, which, if I recall correctly, Simo pointed out is how the word integer is translated in Finnish. Values are positive, negative, or 0. Maximum values depend on the system, and examples 123, negative 34, or 0. Go ahead, Thomas.
This may be very pedantic, but we could also add an example with scientific notation with e to 0. And that would be 100% correct. It's pedantic, but just wanted to point it out.
Is that actually allowed in a numeric field?
Oh, those you by examples, you mean examples of what we can enter in. I was thinking this was a definition. I didn't realize examples were actual. I read the word differently. So yeah, we can just leave it as is.
Okay. And Ralph?
Just one small nitpick. When I'm reading the examples, would it be possible to make the negative value identical to the positive? Those are the only difference is the minus. So, because at the moment you just try to match the pattern and what the difference is, and therefore it would be slightly clearer. This is something I thought during
Okay.
meetings.
I think we can do that. Thomas?
I would, however, note that we replace for example with examples here, but we continue to keep things like for example in the other instances. If we're moving to examples colon, I would do the same elsewhere and say example colon example colon.
Yeah, so this column C is for our suggestions, and we haven't filled that in for the other types yet.
Oh, got it. I thought we had decided not to make suggestions. Thank you.
Yeah, so let's go on to decimal, um, and definitely follow the pattern that we've established where the bottom line will be examples. And how should we start? What's the analog of whole numbers? I guess something like this, a fixed decimal format. Um, and these are different from floats. So you typically wouldn't have 1.23 times 10 to the 32nd. You would use a float for that. So go ahead, Ralph.
Um, for the description, the initial description, the equivalent, I went with the exact numeric data type as the equivalent to whole numbers to describe what it is. It's slightly technical, but it's unavoidable from my perspective, at least for decimal and float numbers.
Right, so that was your suggestion for the first line. Um,
Because that is sort of missing in the current state. It's first starts with ideal, then it stores numbers names in a fixed decimal, because it stores in a fixed decimal format, is picking up basically what decimal is, but that doesn't tell me as someone who is less technical what decimal means or what's the purpose behind. And that's if you take a look, exact numeric data type and an approximate numeric data type as a description and distinguisher between the two.
yeah, I sort of think of decimals and floats as being approximations to real physical quantities, which typically have unlimited precision. So I don't think of either one as being exact. Thomas?
Yeah, to me, rounded is or sorry, numeric decimal is a rounded value where you've chosen the precision of the rounding. So exact to me seems to be not the right word to be using. They are both approximations. It's just with floating, the approximation goes out farther and it's a larger value. Decimal does not have to, it takes fewer places potentially. But it depends on how the database is even saving them. I don't, it's kind of strange to me that they're treated as different things, whereas to me, decimal is rounded to a certain given numeric value.
Yeah, I think the reason
Uh,
for the two
I think,
fields is that they are stored differently in the database. But I'm sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
and I think the important thing is not what they are, but how they are used in calculations. So decimals can be used in exact calculations. Floats cannot be used in exact calculations. So the difference is when you start doing calculations. So I think if we can make it somehow understandable to someone who's not into the kind of the technical side,
In
then I think we could use the word calculations.
But to my knowledge, in Python, a floating is higher precision than something. If I have 12.25, that is rounded, not exact, rounded to 12.25, whereas the real number left as floating could go to much greater precision on the decimals. Like at
Uh,
least within Python, what I learned.
the decimals, they are important for financial information. So I think the most important application is financial information. So
Right,
then it's kind of exact.
but that in float, like in financial, you wouldn't just use 12.3 for dollars. Like in a lot of instances, they would choose what, because it depends on how they've represented something. So just language wise, I'm very confused by the exact because it hasn't something that I've been exposed to in this way. And I was confused looking at this. And we can look for more specific definitions of float, and I would probably suggest we do that if we're going for exact or more precise definitions.
So I'm inclined to try to get across the idea that it represents a number with a fixed degree of accuracy or a fixed number of digits uh, beyond the decimal point, or maybe just a number with a fixed number of digits. So I
Um,
guess, go ahead.
May I just ask then a non-technical person's question? What is then the actual difference, or how does it come? Because it was mentioned that basically in the ideal section, there's the point about decimal idea for exact counts and measures. No, sorry. In the float section, there is the point about its faster processing and more compact storage advantage, usually negligible for modern sites. If decimal and float is similar, according to you, or more or less interchangeable to a certain degree, how does it come then that float is faster in processing?
I I'm not sure, and given that the text here says that the difference is typically negligible, I wonder why you would bother to mention it.
Yeah, I trusted basically that it was there and thought it is an important detail, and therefore I kept it.
So let me choose this and just check what the limits are.
The limits, this is what I've written in my suggestion. Maximum then 32 digits precision and 10 decimal places scale. If you manually enter
Yep,
33, for example,
you'll get a validation error.
you get a validation error afterwards. And that's
Real quick, because I have to answer the door. So looking at the definition, floating is going to be 16 points of precision. So this is like a double float, essentially. They're just calling it decimal, which is why it's confusing to me. I'll be right back.
Okay, so um, sort of following up on what Thomas just said, I think that this format doesn't allow very large numbers. It allows 10 digits to the left of the decimal point. Sorry for that directional term. Um, 10 significant digits. And if you want a number like 10 to the 30th, I think you'd have to use a float. So I think the key thing here is that we have a fixed number of digits. So I'm going to suggest something. Numbers with fixed accuracy. Um, and then the second line should be something very similar to what Ralph proposed here. Um, So I think those two lines together give a pretty accurate description of what this type does. Does that seem like the right direction to move? Go ahead, Aaron. I got a thumbs up from Ralph.
Thanks. I just want to note as well, if you get into that level of precision, it also depends on the database that you're using. So like I think one other, and another thing could be we link out to documentation for people who really need to understand the difference. But most people, if you're in that space, you're probably going to be like looking up the right field type to use. So if we have a documentation page that covers the differences on a granular level, then maybe we link to it. But otherwise, let's keep it simple, I think.
So you think that I already have too much information here?
I mean, again, I don't know if that depends on, yeah, it depends on the database you're using and things like that. So if you get that specific, but yeah.
I mean, remember, we're the usability group. And my point is that if I'm on this page and it doesn't tell me about those limits, I have to go to the next page. Hello, I have to go to the next page. And I have to try to submit that page before I get an error message. And that is bad for usability. It's bad to have to go through this step and get to this step and say, oh, I'm not allowed to have more than 10 digits to the left of the decimal point. I have to go back. So I think from the usability point of view, I want to have that information
Right.
in this description.
I mean, if that's the limits that Drupal is putting in place, then yeah, we can say that. It's just like if you're getting into what the date, like what depending on the storage behind it, then that's where we would struggle. But if this is something where Drupal has said this is like 10 digits, then yeah, that's fine, I think.
Okay, so
Because
we
what
should
what we
follow.
don't sorry, I was just gonna say because what we don't want to do is give potentially misleading information that depends on the environment that you're using.
Right, I agree. Go ahead, Ralph.
And the scenario you've outlined, Benji, I think would it worth to consider aside providing that information about the precision and scale on that choose an option below page, also on the field settings page, because at the moment, if you go there, if you choose number decimal, and if you go there, then on precision, if you manually enter instead of using the stepper, you don't know what the allowed maximum is. You have to fail, and the context isn't provided in the description.
Yeah,
And
I think again we're getting out of scope.
yeah, it's out of scope, but I think it is if we're adding that on that choose an option page, that information, it should be on that page as well.
Yes, I agree. So back to here, we'll have to verify that these are actually limits imposed by Drupal and not by the database.
That's Drupal.
That's what I thought. So if that's accurate, then I think we're basically going to do something like this. Any tweaks? Ralph, I'm a little surprised that you have all of these parentheses since you hate parentheses so much in your
Yeah, but
proposed
in
text.
that case, it's technical terminology, and therefore I wanted to keep it visually separated. In that way, I was unable to avoid it.
Okay. Um, it- should we try to simplify the language a little bit? Do you like maximum of, or should we change that to up to 32 digits. Ralph, you like that? Go ahead,
Yep.
Thomas.
Could, instead of up to, could we use limit of 32 digits?
I suppose we could. I don't feel strongly. Limit of. Does anyone else feel strongly? Where is? Here it is. Limit of 32 digits precision with 10 decimal places scale. Are those in the right order? Should we have scale first and then the as I say digits after the decimal point? In fact, I guess we should be consistent with the form. Form has precision first and then scale, so we should probably list them in the same order. Okay, and I think we're ready to give some examples. Is there any other information either in the existing text or Ralph's proposal?
We have to
Anything?
change it to recommended.
So are we going to keep this text? Or just give examples? We didn't give
Oh,
a
right.
recommended
Oh, right.
for
Oh,
here.
right. True. But my question would be, how do you provide examples that illustrate the difference between decimal and float?
I think we can do that, and let's wait until we're working with floats before we do that. And I'm just seeing, yeah, this allows prefix and suffix. So I think we just need some examples. Um, so two digits after the decimal point suggests a dollar amount to me as an American. Thomas, go ahead.
Um, I I would have included a brief statement that said you can have allows prefixes and suffixes. I don't know if I'm being pedantic again. Where so similar in pattern to how we have in integer values are positive, maximum values depend on the system. I would have said allows for prefixes and suffixes, which separates out the examples which show kind of values from the idea that you might want to use it because you can do pounds and dollars.
I think all of the numeric types allow a prefix and suffix, so that's not a differentiator.
Okay,
It would be nice to convey that information somewhere, but
it's
yeah, but
extra.
these bullet points are mostly for differentiators.
Right. I don't know how you're going to differentiate number or decimal and float if you're just using 2 digits of precision, because they will look identical.
Um, anyway, are there some other obvious decimal numbers? Guess we could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0 point 01, 02, 03, 04, 05, 06, 07, 08, 09. That's 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32. That's probably not something we want to include, but it
How
does
about,
it. Go ahead.
so I was gonna suggest, how about we use pi as a just for a bit of whimsy, you know?
Oh, have 32 digits of pi?
Yeah. And you could use it for the other numbers as well. So, start with examples, 3.14 or whatever, and then keep going. More digits.
That right?
I have no idea.
Go ahead, Ralph.
I'm just looking at it. Would it make sense in case of decimal and float to have both examples and recommended for? Because personally, I would have a hard time when to use decimal and when to use float, and having some sort of recommendation in which context it's preferable to go with decimal and in which context it's preferable to go with float, and at the same time get an illustration, what an example, how a float or a decimal looks like in difference might be helpful in this case.
I think we can get that idea across with suitable examples. So let's come up with examples first and see whether you're satisfied then.
Okay.
And if you still want to provide recommended uses at that point, we can do that. Um, so how do we describe floats? Um,
Thomas raised his hand.
Thomas, do you want to say something?
I was just going to say that if we want to have examples that help us know the difference between these things, I do like the idea of 3.14 going out to its full precision. In the first one, I would add 0 in that instance, so it's 1.23, comma, minus 1.23, comma, 0, comma, the full precision to 32 digits. Oh, wait, but it says with 10 decimal places.
Yeah, there aren't a whole lot of numbers where we want 10 decimal,
Right, but
10 digits to the left of the decimal point.
we don't need to show more than 10. So is that all that you have there? Like 3 point, I didn't count how many you put down. No. Oh yeah, 0 comma. And then to the right of the 3.14, it's 1 4 1 5 9 2 6 5 4 2. I don't think you do the 6 5 3. If
It's
we show the 10 decimal places.
10 decimal places of scale, that's to the left of the decimal point. 32 digits
Oh,
precision, that's to the right of it.
yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yes. Do you simultaneously get 32 digits of precision and 10 scale?
I believe you can do that.
Okay. But then above, and I would have in parentheses, Ralph will hate this, but I'd have in parentheses pi, and then above I'd have 0 comma 3 in parentheses pi, and then you can demonstrate what it would look like in float, and you have the same example for each of these things, demonstrating how it changes in float, decimal, and integer.
Um, oh, we can put it in for the sake of discussion. I don't really love that idea. I guess there's a long history, isn't there, of pi, and some lawmakers have tried to legislate that the value is just 3 because it's so much simpler. Um,
Jeez.
but let's move on to floats, and I think numbers, the representation is different. Um, So they can have exponents or how is that usually described? Or maybe I want to start with the examples.
Want me to float some examples your way?
Yeah. Um, so we can have the same things that we had before. Um, but let me see. I don't remember offhand. Avogadro's constant. I always like to click through to the source. Um, what's going to happen when I try to paste that? Whoops. So something times 10 to the 23rd. What's another good one? It's Planck's constant. Which is, I guess, in this sidebar. Oh, it depends on the units. I guess Avogadro's number is better. It's a pure number. It doesn't depend on units. Um, so having this example with the exponent in there, and I think that's the way it would be represented in Drupal, shows what you can do with floats that you can't do with decimals, that you can have numbers outside the limit of 10 decimal places of scale. Go ahead, Thomas.
Can't we also represent 0.00 e to the 23rd as well? Or is that not a valid representation?
Like this.
Yeah, and I would do it before. I'm just trying to follow what I view as a consistent pattern as best I can. But since we're using Avogadro's number rather than pi, I'm not sure if it holds. The idea was just trying to demonstrate the same numbers in each system.
Yeah.
Though perhaps rather than 1.23, it should be 123.123 or 123.23 or 123.45, just to demonstrate that the decimal points are after, I don't know.
So the exponent is certainly optional. I don't feel that we have to put it in for all of these. I think I do want to have it at least once. And I think the idea of trying to represent the same number in each of the different formats is sort of the wrong thing to do, because the point is you use different things for different purposes. And then, there's basically no way to have Avogadro's constant as an integer or a decimal. Maybe it could be an integer. Is that within the bounds? But it certainly couldn't be a decimal. And on the other hand, pi, there's really very little difference between representing it as a decimal or representing it as a float. So I think having the different numbers is the right thing to do in the examples. Go ahead, Ralph.
Just one technical question. Is on a technical level the distinguisher between decimal and float that floats use to store numbers the exponent, which decimal does not?
I think that's a big difference. And
'Cause
then decimals just restrict you to a fixed number of places before the decimal point and a fixed number of places after the decimal point.
Because for me, as a non-technical user and who is always his problems with math, um, for me, something like the exponent is pretty abstract. And I would, if I get to that page the first time and read those descriptions, having it, for example with the 6.022 blah, 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 E23, I would ask myself, what is exactly meant and what's the difference to decimal? It would be challenging and confusing.
So let's try to get that difference across in words in the first two entries.
Yeah.
How about something like numbers with decimal parts and exponents? And say something like no limits or the only limits are provided by the system as a starting point. And I do have to keep an eye on the time. We still have 7 minutes left. So Ralph, you and I are perhaps at opposite ends of the being comfortable with mathematics,
Yeah.
since I started out life as a mathematician. Um, does that help you?
With my naive approach, I would then think, would it be that would not that it's a reasonable approach, but would it then be possible to choose a number, for example, of 6.022E 2000?
Yes, you could do that.
Oh, okay.
So we could also have a Google, right? A Google is one with 100 zeros.
Oh. Yeah, that might work.
It sounds like a big number.
That's the
I don't
point.
I I don't think that would float.
Yuck, yuck, yuck.
Just one follow-up question for comprehension. If you write 1E100, is that still an explicit number, or is some sort of, in air quotes, rounding included there? Because from my impression, decimal is an absolute number, meaning exact, in sort of exact, in the scope of what's set as the limit, while floating numbers with that e, with the exponent, is it still sort of explicit or more vague? compared to decimal.
Well, that's sort of a philosophical question, and perhaps it, the question really comes up: what happens when you add two numbers or try to multiply two numbers? So Simo had to leave us, but he was saying that that you can do exact computations with decimal numbers, and that's true if you're adding them, but not if you're multiplying them. Whereas floating points, if you try to add two of these, if you try to add a Google to 1.23, you're going to end up with a Google. You're going to sort of totally miss the fact that you've added something to it.
Oh, okay.
So even addition loses accuracy with floating point numbers.
That definitely wouldn't float.
Exactly.
We should end the meeting soon before I come up with more puns.
Yes, we should. We have 3 minutes left.
Give me 3 minutes. I'll get some more, okay? I feel a bit like I'm sinking right now, to be honest.
Oh, what's happening?
Thomas?
Maybe I have to hit enter or click in another cell.
Thomas raised his hand.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Thomas.
Just very briefly, what I'm like, as we've explored this, it seems to me that we want to make certain that we indicate that decimals have uses in more common situations, whereas floating supports when you need values that are outside of the range that decimal supports. So like a Google can't be represented in decimal, but can be represented in float. So if you need speed or values that can't be represented in decimal, then use float. Otherwise, most common use cases that need accuracy should use decimal. Something along those lines. So for instance, if I were a physicist and I was building a site and I wanted to represent large distances in space, I would probably use float for that special use case. However, most people who are using this in business instances or things where they're within the range of the limits, decimal is what people should use most times.
Okay, we have to cut off discussion because we have 1 more minute. But Ralph, you can have the last word.
Based on Thomas's point, I really think it would be helpful because for me, decimal and float are two abstract terms until today, and I even haven't completely understood it while I was writing up those suggestions of mine. But I think having aside the points we've come up with yet and the examples, aside that, having that recommendation and to set it into context, when to use it, and the reasoning behind would be really, really helpful to convey the exact differences from my point of view.
Okay, so we can update this next time. Oh, we still have a lot left to do, don't we? So thanks all for this hard work. And maybe we'll take a break from this next time and find some other issue, or maybe we'll just keep plugging away at this. But one way or another, we'll have a meeting again next week. Hope you can make it.
Thank you, Benji. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. And I'll be back next week with more floating puns.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And Ralph, I think I'll open the issue about moving the media out of its sort of top level position that it has now.
Yeah, you can.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.